Anyone who's played Minecraft understands what griefing is. Destroying someone's work for fun or for spite. On the oldest anarchy server in Minecraft, griefing has been a part of life here for the past decade. Anything that gets built here eventually gets destroyed. It's the anarchy circle of life. But once in a while, a grief will happen that is so severe that even longtime players are taken by surprise. Today, I'll be showing you several locations on the server that have been griefed so badly that they could never, ever be repaired, restored, or brought back, even with an army of players working around the clock. Some of these places you might be familiar with, some you might not. The ruins that made it into today's history video had to meet 6 different criteria in order to be included. The base has to have notable history on the server, 95 to 100% of the original blocks are missing or destroyed, the original base is unrecognizable, the ruins have been griefed more than once, there have been unsuccessful repair attempts on the base, and the base has had coordinates publicly released. After consulting with several longtime 2b2t players, we came to the conclusion that several different monuments on the server met this criteria. For each base, I'll be showing you the history behind the base, what the base originally looked like, and footage of what it looks like today. Let's get started. The Facepunch Republic. In the early history of 2b2t, one of the first large player migrations happened when members of the Facepunch forums joined 2b2t and would go on to form the Facepunch Republic. Their main base was not far from spawn, being located at the coordinates -2000x, -2000z. The base would eventually be nicknamed 2k2k. Since the base was so close to spawn, it was griefed very heavily in 2012, though it would partially be restored for use as the base of operations during the first incursion. Eventually, it would be griefed again, and the lava cast above the base became one of the most massive on 2b2t. Ironically, the massive lava cast actually preserved a decent amount of the base underneath it, allowing players over the next few years to excavate the ruins. Shown here is footage of me exploring the excavated ruins in 2016, with many of the original buildings and structures still intact underneath all the cobblestone, as well as some restorations. But remember, one of the criteria for today's video was a base being griefed more than once. Well, that's exactly what happened. Like so many bases on the server, once the YouTube invasion of 2016 began and a massive influx of players joined the server, it didn't take long for wannabe griefers to grief the ruins even harder. Take a look at what the Facepunch Republic looks like today. Not only have most of the original blocks been destroyed, but practically the entire biome has been nuked, with numerous areas going all the way down to bedrock, similar to what you would see at spawn. The face punchers that gathered here nearly a decade ago have no idea that their home and meeting place has become a crater. It's weird to think about. But now, let's move on. The Valley of Wheat. The Valley of Wheat is one of the most famous landmarks in 2b2t history, but the history of its griefing has never truly been discussed, even by me. The Valley of Wheat stood for so long because of something I like to call 2b2t politics. Jang, the original creator of the Valley of Wheat, was highly respected on the server by pretty much everybody. To grief the valley would mean excommunication from practically every existing group on the server. Old 2b2t player Silver Crown King recalls wanting to grief the valley on numerous occasions, but refrained from doing so, fearing that he would fall out of the good graces of his friends and allies. While the valley was griefed several times, the first person to do it in a major capacity was Imbager. By griefing the valley, he fell out of the good graces of a large portion of the player base. Nobody wanted to invite him to bases or even talk to him. Even though he was the first person to actually grief the valley in a major capacity, he is actually most known for putting a shoe on his head. That's not a joke, by the way. He actually put a shoe on his head, and that's what most of us remember him for. Look, I don't write 2b2t history, okay? I just tell people about it. It gets a little bizarre sometimes. Anyway, let's continue. The valley was repaired by Jang as well as XCC2 and others, and it became good as new again. But when the YouTube invasion of 2016 happened and the Russia War began, large numbers of new players flocked to the Valley of Wheat to try and feed themselves. The Valley of Wheat's location on a major axis meant that it was easy to find, and a very short walk if using the Nether. Over the summer, the valley would be blown up and griefed several times, and by the end of the war, it was a disaster. However, it wasn't completely lost yet. What doomed the valley, though, is that many new players that had used the valley to save themselves publicly announced their plans to rebuild the Valley of Wheat. This is what truly doomed the valley. It would end up being griefed several times over just by the end of 2016. Every few months, a new griefer would come along and grief it even harder and harder and harder. Pretty soon, attempts to repair the valley became useless, as this is what the valley looks like today. Almost none of the original blocks are still here. The lava cast that sits on top of the valley is so large that it actually took me a few minutes to fly around the entire thing using elytra. In some places, the valley looks just as bad as Spawn. The Valley of Wheat has become an example of why you should never announce plans to rebuild something, as you will only bring more attention to it. Those of you in my comments section during the past 3 years that have said, "I want to repair the Valley of Wheat," all I can say to you is good luck. Point Nemo. Back in 2017, famous 2b2t player Burnsy and his digging crew managed to finally dig a tunnel in the Nether all the way to the world border. At the world border, a base was built and appropriately named Point Nemo. For those unaware, in the real world, Point Nemo is a spot in the Pacific Ocean that is farther away from land than any other place on Earth. Because the base was at the end of the X Highway, it was no secret where the base was. Even after I made my journey to the world border, the base lasted for a few extra weeks, but eventually, griefers caught up with all of the travelers, and Point Nemo was nuked. Anything that was placed behind the world border is still intact somewhat, but every other structure there has been nuked beyond recognition. There was one major repair attempt on the base, but like all others on the list, it failed. Players to this day still make the pilgrimage to the world border, and what they find at the end of the X Highway is not what was once found there. Spawn. Though not necessarily a base, I'd like to talk about Spawn since it's such a recognizable part of 2b2t. You would not believe the amount of people in my comments section claiming that they want to restore Spawn. It is by far the most severe grief on the server, and considering the size and its history, I would go as far as to say it is the most severe grief in the history of Minecraft, period. No matter what server or what version of the game, this is griefing transcended into an art form. Every single attempt to repair Spawn in the past decade has failed. So many blocks have been removed, displaced, or blown up. Making Spawn look like a normal biome again would take such a tremendous amount of manpower that it simply isn't possible in the anarchy environment. A single person could undo countless hours of work with a few stacks of TNT or some withers. While there are groups that at least repair Spawn infrastructure such as highways and portals, no real 2b2t player is foolish enough to attempt to fix the mess that is 0-0. The moral of today's story is that if you're thinking about repairing something that's been griefed heavily on 2b2t, you might as well forget about it. It's dead. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to subscribe. If you are an experienced 2b2t player and you feel that I left out an important base from today's list, make sure to let me know in the comments section. But I feel that with the 6 criteria presented, we hit pretty much the most important bases on the server. But anyway, that's it. Thank you so much for watching today. Take it easy, Fit Fam, and if you plan to play on 2b2t, just make sure to stay alive out there.